Welcome back, nerds. Fino here with a guide for Aoko Aozaki. In Fate Extra, she's the lady that upgrades your servant's stats. For Toko enthusiasts, she's the puppeteer's bitch-ass sister. In Tsukihime, she gives Shiki his trademark glasses, which she stole from Toko. I'm starting to think Toko might have a point in all this. But Aoko has her own story, Mahoyo, and with FGO's crossover, she's become a playable servant, a 5-star limited foreigner. It's no surprise that I hold Aoko in reasonably high regard. She did make the list of my top 10 servants for this year. But she's got a fairly unusual and verbose skill set, so she's got a learning curve and can be quite intimidating for new players to pick up. Now before I get into the weeds of her more esoteric strategies, let me give you the need to know. The real magic starts once you use Aoko's Noble Phantasm, Unfinished Blue. This transforms her into Super Aoko, and making this happen is your highest priority. There are some relevant decisions to make as regular Aoko, but pretty much none of them involve staying as regular Aoko. We'll pick away at the specific implications of transforming as they turn up, but firstly she gets indefinite duration, buster, and extra attack buffs. Unfortunately, they did not learn their lesson from Jekyll, so these are just unprotected buffs. If a purge gets through, say goodbye to your card damage. The reason why she gets these buffs is to compensate for a mechanical change. Her buster and extra cards become AoE, a little like you Olga Marie in Lost Belt 7. There is a catch though. The downside is that these cards have significantly reduced damage, among other things. Also, Aoko loses one of her 2 busters on transforming. There's an icon that tells you which one, but it's not the most readable thing in the world, so I'd recommend putting a command code on the other one. Now, command codes and on-hit effects have a bit of a weird interaction with Aoko's AoE cards. On-hit buffs won't trigger multiple times, so you can't use Holy Knight's Aurora to gain a shitload of stars, for example. This also applies to something like Summer Chloe's on-hit manuscript generation. What you can do is run an ailment inflictor like Consort of the Sun to burn every enemy on screen while also leveraging its normal crit damage effect. Pretty cool, right? Because these cards act as pseudo-noble phantasms, the game checks before and after they resolve to see if any enemies have died. This is surprisingly useful for enemies that have multiple low-health gut stacks. You can queue something like NPQB with Aoko's cards. Your Noble Phantasm pops 1, your quick card pops another, your buster card takes out a third, and your extra attack gets 1 more. This mainly works at low health values, but there are fights in the game where enemies take that route, and in situations like this, Aoko can be surprisingly useful. Now I mentioned a Noble Phantasm, and here's an area where the developers actually learned their lesson from Jekyll. Super Aoko has a separate Noble Phantasm, and in my humble opinion, this is way more useful than any of her card shenanigans. Earthlight Starbow is an AoE arts attack. Its overcharge preemptively reduces your enemy's defense for 3 turns, while its regular effect gives Aoko preemptive invuln pierce and defense ignore for a single turn. There's another effect, but I'll get to that in a bit. Just on the basis of this combo pierce alone, this is an extremely useful NP. Invuln pierce is something you can shoehorn into your team with Calamity Jane, but defense ignore is a much more difficult effect to get onto someone who doesn't already have it. Usually it involves a major compromise like running a specific craft essence or Sherlock Holmes, who's a pain to get off the field once he does his job. But with Aoko, you get these whenever you fire off that NP, which should be fairly often. Privilege of being an art servant. I've gotten a lot of mileage out of Earthlight Starbow, mostly in boss fights with a large number of intermediate health enemies, ones that have mixed protection effects. This style of encounter is common in challenge quests, and you get a fair number of them in the main story as well. These fights also tend to feature mixed class arrangements, and this is an area where Aoko's Foreigner class often works to her advantage. Foreigners only really interact with Berserkers and Pretenders, who they have full class advantage against, and Alter Egos, who they have full disadvantage against. So you can count on her to go neutral in most matchups. And assuming they aren't the main boss, you can often brute force Alter Ego side mobs in the few occasions they do appear. Up until this point, I haven't talked about Aoko's skills, since it's easy to overthink their usage. But now that you know what your main game plan is, transform and then spam Super Aoko's Noble Phantasm, you can start to figure out which skills are good and which ones are highly situational. As regular Aoko, you have 2 notable decision points. Do you use skill 1, and do you use skill 3? The former is Load Magical Bullet, and gives her 3 stacks of this effect, also 20 stars. Magical Bullets are Aoko's main buff. While she has bullets, her quick arts and buster normals consume a single bullet to get a 50% attack buff. Her Noble Phantasm eats upwards of 10 for bonus damage, and her extra card consumes all magical bullets in exchange for gaining all those attack buffs at once. Regardless of your game plan, maintaining your supply of magical bullets is going to be a very high priority. While a modest effect, Load Magical Bullet consequentially has a 2-turn cooldown. This is a highly exploitable number, and while a Buster Servant would be creaming their pants, the more artsy Aoko still has a way of turning this to her advantage. When Aoko transforms, her cooldowns stay exactly where they are, even if they're replaced by ones with longer downtime. So on release, she can pop Load Magical Bullet, transform, wait a turn, and then use Super Aoko's first skill. But there's another thing that makes this 2-turn cooldown exploitable. Later this year, we get Append 5, which gives a one-time cooldown reduction to each of your skills when you max it out. By taking this, your cooldown goes to 1, meaning you can use Load Magical Bullet and have its replacement up the same turn you get access to Super Aoko's skill set. The skill you'd be comboing into is Find the Milky Way. This grants 6 magical bullets, 1 turn of invincibility, and 3 turns of arts effectiveness. So this strategy gives you access to more magical bullets than you'd normally have on turn 2, thus making your opening turns more explosive. The other decision point is To Your Era Once More. This is a targeted rainbow buff, crit damage, health regen combo that lasts for 3 turns. For that same duration, it also applies a status called Plot Armor that prevents its target from receiving the demerits of their own abilities. That sounds ridiculous, but don't get too excited. This effect has more exceptions and rulings than the average Gear 1 Yu-Gi-Oh card. For Aoko herself, it doesn't really help since none of her own drawbacks are preventable, even with this skill. If you use it on an ally, it can prevent some but not all drawbacks that eat stars, self-stun, apply ailments, and so on. You could even give it to someone like Ogita J. Soji to let her tank through her own deficient skill set and actually do shit after firing off her NP. Notably, it does not prevent self-destruction effects like Sojiro's or certain box debuffs like Oberon's Ending of Dreams. I'm not going to say it's impossible to get mileage out of plot armor in a high-stakes fight, but I've personally never benefited from that specific effect. I almost always use the skill on Aoko herself for those card-type buffs, which are not removed when she transforms. Using it on someone else implies that you're running Aoko in a multi-core team, which I generally dislike. In a challenge quest environment, running her as the sole attacker lets you more easily spam out her Noble Phantasm. In farming, Aoko's one-turn startup makes team building complicated. Not impossible as any Palamash partisan will tell you, but it does mean someone else has to clear the wave on turn 1. It could be a suicide lead like Habitrot or Sojiro, or it could be a true multi-core partner, someone like Summer Castoria, if there's only one enemy in the first wave. If Aoko has damage to spare on the other AoE waves, she can pitch To Your Era Once More to them and extend their reach. If they happen to be a servant with preventable demerits, then you get actual mileage out of plot armor. Just remember to use Aoko's NP before your other servants, otherwise it'll fizzle because every enemy on screen is dead, leaving you with regular Aoko on turn 2 and minus 40 AP. Unlike skill 1, which lets you double dip, the reason why you use regular Aoko's third skill is because Super Aoko's is, special. First Star eats up 100% charge in exchange for buffing Aoko's Buster and extra cards for 5 turns. It also gives 50% charge to everyone except Aoko, and also gives them 2 turns of cooldown reduction. It then tops off with a party-wide 5k heal. The only situation where you should mindlessly push this button is if, through masterful carding, Aoko somehow starts a turn with 200% or more charge. You're trading an overcharge level on Earthlight Starbow, which is just 5% defense down, and at that price, I'd say it's worth it. Otherwise, First Star is a peculiar skill, because it assumes one of 3 things. 1, that you're willing to not fire off Earthlight Starbow, 2, that you'd rather use your regular cards, or 3, your teammates have a higher priority on their own NPs. For survival reasons, you may take option 3. If you're running Aoko with Lady Avalon and Castoria in a pseudo-immortal team, boosting them by 50% can actually save a run. For Lady Avalon in particular, comboing Aoko's 5k heal with the 3k from Winds of Avalon gives you a big health swing across your entire frontline. But if you're running this team, be aware of Aoko's passive, Magician. It gives her a bunch of resistances, including 20% purge resistance, but the main draw here is that it also converts any invuln that Aoko receives into anti-enforcement defense. All 3 members of this team have a source of invulnerability, so you can keep that chain going for quite a while. But what you need to watch out for is that any extant source of anti-enforcement will prevent Castoria's stack-based protection from applying. So if you need to pop Round of Avalon to survive, remember to not recklessly throw out another source of protection on that same turn, otherwise you're just sabotaging yourself. You may have noticed that I haven't mentioned regular Aoko's second skill in all this. Well, on paper, Magical Circuit Rotation provides some nice recurring value, 20% charge, party-wide for 3 turns. But these effects are removed on transforming, and worse yet, its 7-turn cooldown locks you out of Super Aoko's version for a while, so there's no good reason to stay as regular Aoko past turn 1. You'd have to be literally forced into it by game mechanics that stop you from mustering enough charge to metamorphose. If it's a situation where you have to play grab-ass for several turns at the start of a fight, maybe you could justify using this. But practically speaking, you're better off saving your load for Magic Circuit Orbit. This is Super Aoko's second skill, and it's a 100% battery that dumps out 40 stars. It also has a long 7-turn cooldown, but it compensates for the charge you use to transform and lets you fish for crits, which you can use to either hunt for charge or cash out damage on her Buster card, depending on what you drew. A significant part of Aoko's skill set is devoted to buffing the damage on her AoE cards, and this is a tempting gimmick on paper, but in reality, I'm sorry to say it really is just a gimmick. The first and biggest issue is that Aoko's extra card eats every magical bullet you have, and this makes it hard to deal a controlled amount of damage. Not to mention it puts you back at square one on the following turn. So if you're waiting to cash out with your Buster card and Earthlight Starbow, doing a Brave Chain on Aoko can actually sabotage your plans. The second problem is that Aoko loses one of her 2 Buster cards when she transforms. It turns into an Arts card, which is great for NP spam, but terrible for her AoE card strategy, unless you do a BBCL strat to lock Aoko into her full hand, but even this has a problem. If you only have Aoko's cards, then you're forced to Brave Chain, which destroys your magical bullet stock. So you'd have to keep either Summer BB or your support's NP ready so they can break CL's chain. It's awfully convoluted, and frankly not worth the trouble 99% of the time. Super Aoko has 2 notable passives that a regular form doesn't. Deploy Magical Bullet gives her 2 stacks at the start of each turn. The upside of this is that you'll almost never have to use Earthlight Starbow at its default damage value. Secondly, she has a passive version of Magic Circuit Rotation, a weaker but continuous variant of her normal form second skill. Its 10% party-wide charge per turn amounts to a free Prismacosmos on your entire frontline, and it's very useful, especially for the pseudo-immortal team. For craft essences, you have 2 general approaches. Black Rail is ideal for most situations since it boosts the damage of Earthlight Starbow, but if you're more interested in carding and want to run a bunch of low/non-charging supports, consider throwing in a little second magic to go along with the 5th. Kaleidoscope lets Aoko start at full charge and transform without the need to commit any additional resources on turn 1. For servants like Astoria and Waver who have buffs tied to their batteries, this lets you get their full effect durations as Super Aoko. If you have neither, then something like Ocean Flyer or Holy Night Supper can tide you over in the meantime. You wouldn't run it normally, but Aoko has a notable bond CE in Waiting in the Sky. This gives her NP damage and an additional magic bullet every turn. This effect actually makes Aoko a solid Grand Servant candidate since they can run bond CEs at no cost while also using something like Black Rail. Unfortunately, Grand Servant bonuses apply in a very limited range of content, so you can't take that extra bullet into your average fight. Aoko is a strong servant, but I have a hard time telling people to go apeshit with her, since her main appeal, that Arts NP with Combo Pierce, isn't something exclusive to her among this year's major releases. I generally like Aoko's class interactions better than Space Ereshkagul's, and for boss fights where neither of them has offensive class advantage, I tend to prefer Aoko. But there's no denying that Eresh has a major edge because she doubles as an AoE Arts Ultra Generalist servant, one that fits very well into the dominant style of 90++ farming teams while still posing her own threat in boss fights. By contrast, Aoko struggles in the farming department due to the clumsiness of her startup. That and her other gimmick is being really good at applying hits onto multiple enemies, whether to wear down their protection or pop gut stacks. Situationally useful, absolutely, but it's not a killer app when you're weighing the 2 against each other. So while Aoko is a great pickup, she's stuck competing with an even better servant. But if you already have an extremely invested Ultra Generalist like, say, Summer Ibuki, then there may actually be a case where Aoko is the more valuable servant. Even if you're playing primarily for power, there's value in expanding the possibilities of what your roster can do, and in that situation, Aoko's AoE card shenanigans may actually give you something that Space Eresh's general power cannot. But if you pick her, whether for power or love, I'd recommend getting NP2 at minimum. Some servants like Kukul Khan can ride off the strength of their carding even at low NP levels. Aoko isn't one of them. Most of her value is in Earthlight Starbow, and being at NP1 will greatly hinder your ability to use it effectively. For my part, I've had her at NP3 for a while, and I think it's the sweet spot damage-wise. Unlike your main farmers, she doesn't need to min-turn every encounter and can opt for a sustained damage value game. If you want to go higher, I say fish for extra copies on one of her return banners. No rush. Thanks for watching, lads. Like if you found this video helpful, subscribe for more event and servant guides, and come watch me at twitch.tv/Finotaisen where I stream every weekend, Friday through Sunday, 3 PM Pacific time. This week I'm finishing the Mahoyo event on Sunday, so stop by and hang out. I'll see you there.